It's time for my June wrap-up / monthly recommendations based off what I've read in June. If you're new here, I have decided that when I do my wrap-ups, I'm going to arbitrarily put all my books into categories that I would recommend. And there would obviously be a I would not recommend section if that's a thing that unfortunately happens to me where I read bad books, but happy to say, I think so far every book I've read has merit for someone. And also, before we get into it, I have a new shirt from my mom that's pretty awesome that I can show you guys real quick. But it's "Reading is my sport." So cute, little mouse. So let's get into it. I read 13 books, which is pretty great. I am happy with that. So I read a lot of fantasy this month, but fantasy has many subgenres, so I kind of broke it down into the fantasy I would recommend for people who like certain subgenres of fantasy. And the first category is kind of, I don't even know if it's a subgenre, but it's my favorite part of fantasy is when you have this complex, intricate world building, this just immersive setting with, I think that's why I read fantasy. I want a new world. If I wanted this world, there are so many good historical fictions out there. So this section I'm going to call High Fantasy with Unique World Building. And what I mean by unique is it's not your standard European medieval-based fantasy worlds, okay? And the first one, I actually do have a review up for this when you're seeing this video, so I will put that up in the cards. But this is the Dreamblood Duology by N.K. Jemisin. So I read The Killing Moon at the beginning of the month, and I ended the month with The Shadowed Sun, and I really love this duology by N.K. Jemisin. Sorry if you're hearing a cat. He has a few thoughts. But this is an Egyptian-inspired fantasy setting, so desert fantasy. You have dream magic that's used for healing. It's really cool. But also very intricate, very not hand-holdy. There are glossaries in the back of both of these that I don't think are spoilery glossaries. I also don't think you need them. So if you're someone who doesn't like when words are thrown at you without context, you can look it up right away and you're fine. If you're someone who likes that type of breadcrumb world building, you also can just wait and it will be explained to you. So yeah, this is the first thing I would recommend, especially if you're looking for more Jemisin. This is a really quality one, something I really enjoyed. The next one I read is Redemption in Indigo by Karen Lord. And I don't think it's your standard high fantasy, but it is written by Karen Lord, who's from Barbados, and it definitely has that Caribbean storytelling elements to it. It has creatures that are inspired by the mythology of that region. It is wonderful, and it's pretty short. It reminded me of the elements I really love of The Princess Bride, and what I like from the satirical writing of Terry Pratchett, but with a different setting, a different cast of characters. I love how funny and self-aware Karen Lord is in this story. It's amazing. As you can see, I bought a copy, which isn't something that happens often. And yeah, I am really excited to see what more there is to read in the Caribbean SFF space, because there are a lot of great authors in that sphere, and it's kind of what I've been craving in fantasy lately, which is like new settings, new perspectives, new integration of different cultures. Because I've been reading fantasy for a long time now, and I'm excited that there are still things that are new to me. Like, it's not new that these books are being written, but it's new that I am discovering them. And the last one I'll mention is a really, really short novella, A Dead Djinn in Cairo. Now, this one I heard about first from Justine from I Should Read That, and it's a very short kind of detective desert story, which I really like. I like desert fantasy. I especially like when it has Middle Eastern culture and different mythical creatures. And you have that here. You have this very mystical urban setting, but it's not like your standard urban fantasy setting, because you have these different creatures and you're trying to solve the murder of this dead djinn and why is that happening. And it's really cool. It's a really fun short story. It's like, I want to say 50 or 60 pages, and I had a great time. and there is a longer novella that I'm looking forward to read by this author. The next section I'm calling political high fantasy, and it also, both of these I think happen to fall under medieval European fantasy, but I think my biggest takeaway from these fantasy books is that they are heavy in the political intrigue and the politics, so if those are things you like, you should read these. And the first one will be Time of Contempt. This is currently my least favorite book in the Witcher series. But if you really like politics, I think you will like this story more than I did. I also think I'm still going to read the series because now I have a lot of setup for myself. I didn't love this story, but if you like a lot of politics, if you like a lot of players, if you like a lot of backstabbing and double agenting, this is a pretty good story. There's not a lot of action in this one, which is probably what I wanted. Like, I started off this series with a monster hunter, and he needs to hunt more monsters, is what I want. So this has become more of a political fantasy, which it's not a deal breaker, but that's why I'm putting it here, so that you know the Witcher series is much more political than I thought it was. So now you know, and if you like that, you should check it out. And the last one I'll talk about is The Last Arguments of King by Joe Abercrombie. This is the last book in the First Law trilogy, which is very political in nature, especially in this book. This is my favorite book in that trilogy. I have a weird relationship with this trilogy and this author. He writes really well. It's really well written, really great characters. This third book has the best payoff, but it's also so many words. And I say that as someone who rereads the Stormlight Archives every time a new book comes out. It's one of those things where once I choose to listen to the audiobook, I really like that I'm listening to it, but when I'm not listening to it, I don't want to pick it up. But if you're someone who likes character-driven, political, high fantasy with kind of a low magic system, this is a great trilogy. It's a well-loved trilogy. You will have quality writing here. I have a friend who is so picky about characters who really likes this series. And I mean, he is so picky. And I really like watching the progressions of some of these characters. I think in this one particularly, I really enjoyed the progression of Logan Ninefingers, who is a northern, do they use the word barbarian in this book? But he's from the north. And the Northmen are kind of more barbarian, not Viking, but, kind of, they're not as quote-unquote civilized as the other people in Adua. Oh, I'm finally remembering the name of this place. I don't know how that just happened. If you watched my vlogs, I can never remember the name of this area of this fantasy world. There are no maps, which I wouldn't have looked at anyways, but it makes it hard to reference. But yeah, this is one of the high fantasy political darlings, and I agree. It's really well written, really great characters, and the audiobook is phenomenal. Now, the next section is all over the place in terms of age range, but they're all contemporary urban fantasies. At least that's what I'm calling them. And we're going to start off with Ninth House. So this is adult. Very adult. This is... Leigh Bardugo is known for her young adult works. This is not a young adult book. I have not read her young adult works, but I really did enjoy this story. It is about a world where you have secret societies, and this is in Yale's area, so New Haven, Connecticut, and there is also a society that keeps the other societies in check. Not so much in a sense of keeping them ethically in check, but more just making sure that they don't kill too many people is what I got from it. And so you are following Alex, who is part of the secret society that keeps the other societies in check. There is a mysterious murder, and it's kind of a murder mystery fantasy investigation. It's very dark. It's very much the pacing of a character who just is going to get things thrown at her over and over again. It also has very interesting choice of how to world build. I really liked it. It has a very slow burn integration world building, but I could see it maybe kind of feeling random, or like you don't hold on to what you're told at any given point in the story. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. I will say there are trigger warnings for a lot of things, particularly sexual assault, drug addiction. Yeah, those were particularly ones that stuck with me. And I'm going to make a review for this in the future, as I mentioned in my TBR video. And it's a book that I think really attempts to talk about a lot of different things and a lot of hard things to talk about. So it's not a perfect book, but I found it much more compelling than I expected, if that makes sense. I'm not an anti-urban fantasy reader, but it's not the fantasy I gravitate towards. And I think I was worried that this was going to be one of those adult fantasies by a young adult author that read like their young adult works, but with more sex and drugs, and that I don't think that was the case. I thought this read very much like any other adult fantasy I was reading. I think if you like the Dresden Files, you might like this, but it doesn't have that male gaze that I personally have a hard time getting through sometimes when I read those books. I definitely, for some reason, I was thinking about the Dresden Files a lot when I was thinking about the latter pacing of this book. I will also warn, maybe it's a good thing for you, there is this non-linear storytelling. You're going to have two timelines that are in the past of the first chapter, and you're going to follow them. So you're going to be going back in time, and then back in time, then back to this first. It's kind of, it was fine for me, but it's this non-linear storytelling that is, sometimes it doesn't jive with everyone. So just know that. The next one I want to talk about is a young adult book named Pet. Oh, I'm going to have a review for this one too. I really liked Pet. I listened to the audiobook. It is about Jam, who grows up in a town called Lucille. Yes, they grow up in Lucille, which is a place that is supposed to have killed all the monsters. And monsters in this case are supposed to be all the bad things in societies, and they've all been saved by the angels, essentially. So the revolutionaries, the activists. And so this is a story where her mom accidentally creates this thing called Pet, and Pet is a monster hunter. And so Jam has to come to terms with there are monsters to hunt, and then figuring out what they are hunting. And it's a really, really good story. I highly recommend the audiobook and physically reading it. It's beautiful prose. Yes, it's technically a young adult, although there are trigger warnings, and I consider the trigger warning a spoiler, so I will put that down below in the description. So if you need to check the trigger warning, you can. But I do feel that it is handled in a way that this is a story for all ages, for the most part. I mean, yes, it's young adult, but I think I could easily I could read this to a child of mine, and we could learn and have a discussion together. I don't think it's a bad way to talk about certain quote-unquote monsters to children, and as an adult, I thoroughly enjoyed it. So Pet's really great. I'm excited to put a review for that. But if you are looking for some beautiful storytelling with compelling commentary and a world and society with very casually diverse characters, it's not a part of the plot, any of the representation in this book. For example, I haven't told you that Jam is trans, because Jam being trans is not a plot point in this story, but they are. They are a trans woman, and it's really well handled. I could go on forever, and I'm going to in a review, so I need to stop myself, but Pet's really, really good, and I'm so glad the solar-powered book discussion group, which I will link down below, like I've been trying to, and I actually remembered the name this time, so I'm proud of myself. They put together slow read book discussions every few months, and this was for this month, and I'm just so glad I was able to join in because it was so good and enhanced by discussion. And the last one I'll mention is The Lightning Thief. This is the first book in the Percy Jackson series, and it was fun. If you want a middle grade, that is a fun ride. I don't like questing stories very much, but this was a really fun questing plot. I love Greek mythology. I don't think that's a hot take. I feel like a lot of us like Greek mythology. And I loved the portrayal of the Greek gods that we got to see. I thought they were hysterical. I don't know if I love our main cast that much. I mostly loved the different ways we personified different mythological creatures and gods. Hades is hysterical. Dionysus is hysterical. I really enjoyed that. Personally, I found the characters a little dumb, but it's a middle grade. So if you go into it and you're here are 12-year-olds thrown into a bizarre situation. Let's see how they handle it. It's a fun ride. And I really like that Rick Riordan really tries to show children it's okay that you are different. In this story in particular, to be a hero means you probably have ADHD and dyslexia. which are normally seen in our society as handicaps. And here, if you have those things, it's because, you need to be battle ready. Dyslexia is because you're meant more to read Greek literature and Greek alphabet. You're not meant for the American alphabet. Like, I don't know, to make it more of a superpower, I thought it's really good. I don't have dyslexia or ADHD, but I know that this is how my sibling took it when they read it growing up. So yeah, it's a fun story. I am excited and a little concerned to keep going. I know the second one's not for everyone. But yeah, that's my first middle grade probably that I've read on this channel. So that's all the fantasy I read. Like I said, I read a lot of fantasy this past month. But I did read a few sci-fi, and again, these were all over the place. And the first one I'll talk about is The Sirens of Titan. Now, I have a huge discussion video with this with the Codex Cantina. We filmed it earlier this week. It is a long, but really, I think, quality discussion on this work. I don't know when it's going to be posted, but when it is, I will post a link down below, and I will have a link to the Codex Cantina's channel. But we really went into specifically the author's background and the different themes in this story. Now, I wouldn't recommend this as a read for someone for just entertainment, like I want to read a fun Kurt Vonnegut story. Because if you don't know, he is a very satirical, kind of bizarre writing style for an author. I've read Slaughterhouse-Five, and he, like I said, he's very satirical. He has a certain humor to him. And this is his second novel, and there's a lot. I think the general context is he didn't know if he'd get to write another book, so he put almost all of his thoughts in here. It's not very long, so I think it was one of those cases where he had too many messages. And so for me, it's like a 3-star-ish read. Like, it was good, but I got frustrated. And, like, it's one of those things where it's intentionally a plot that makes no sense and that is random because that's part of the messaging. But as someone who consuming a story, that's frustrating. Now, if you want to read it for the analysis, yes, you should read this book. This is a great book to analyze. It's a great book to really dissect. But if you want to read it just to pick up a read, I wouldn't recommend that. But keep your eye out for that video, though, because I don't know. Like I said, this is a great book to parse and discuss. And the next one I read was Catfishing on CatNet. This is a young adult. You should read this book. Oh, it's so good. This is a story about a girl who has to keep traveling around the country with her mom to run away from her dad, so she only has friends on this online platform called CatNet. And in that platform, it's run by an AI, but nobody knows that. And this AI is part of their clouder, which is what they call the specific groups, because that's a group of cats is a clouder. I know some of you already know that I've said that, but I still think that's a cool fact. And so what happens is that this whole mystery and thriller part starts up, in addition to them finding out that there's this AI that's their best friend. And it's really cool. There's a lot of commentary on gender identity, gender inclusivity, on sexual education in America. It's also just a really fun story about friendship. And yeah, I just don't, it was so good. I don't know what I expected from it. And it's really good, and you should read it. That's my recommendation. You should read it. I am not a young adult reader on average, and I thoroughly enjoyed this book. So I think most people would enjoy this book because it's young adult in that it's a coming-of-age story, but it's just written like a really fun thriller. It's a very smart work, if that makes sense. And I think of it the same way I think of Pet. It feels like anyone can read it and take something from it and have a good time. And the last one I will mention that I read for sci-fi is An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. Man, I did not even think about picking up this book till Audrey at Quarantine Pages was reading it, and then my friend Deanie had read it, and I needed a new audiobook, and I was like, Audrey, should I listen to this? And they're like, in all caps, yes. So I did. And it's wonderful. So this is not your standard sci-fi in terms of being very heavy in it. So the sci-fi element is you have these statues that are kind of quote-unquote invaders from another world. So think of, if you've seen the movie Arrival, stuff just shows up. And the human race is like, stuff just showed up. And the person who discovered it is April May. And April May becomes viral very quickly. And it's mostly them discovering the mystery of these statues, although maybe not completely. I just want to put that there in case you go into this really wanting some answers. You will get some answers. Not all of them maybe, but a few. But it's mostly about April, May, and what does it mean to become viral so quickly? What happens to your relationship with the internet, your relationship with your own people? And the narrator's just so good. Like, this audiobook was so good. And that's what I've got. So if you want a story that has a really funny, flawed protagonist, and I mean flawed, but she's self-aware in her flaws, because it's a first-person storytelling, and it's kind of funny how hard she is on herself, but I think rightfully so. She's kind of a disaster. And if you like that integration with some cool technological mysteries, I'd pick it up. Plus, the sequel comes out this month, and I already have a hold on it from the library, so I'm very excited. And the last book I'm going to bring up didn't really fit into any categories, and this is the nonfiction. This is White Rage. This is a nonfiction I've talked about a lot in my vlogs recently, and I recommend it to all people. All people should read this book. I don't care if you're a history buff or not, you should understand how we have gotten here. And that is to say, we have not gotten here very fairly. And that's what this book goes into. It goes into every time, it's like we've celebrated the civil rights movement, the winning of the Civil War, we've celebrated Obama being president, we have celebrated all these big movements. We have films about Brown versus Board of Education. We forget that after each of these big wins, we have then chosen as a society to ignore or initiate changes in our system that then basically undid all of that forward progression. I guess not completely. We're not still in 1865. But there are a lot of backwards movements. It's very much, one step forward, two steps back sort of progression when you read this book. And you really should read it. I physically read it. I probably would have preferred this as an audiobook, but I didn't have that as an option. And it is going to read like a textbook at some extent. It's a lot of history. It's not one of those storytelling nonfictions, but I still think you should read it. Or read other nonfictions like it to understand how America has gone here. And even if you're not American, I'm going to assume your country also has similar patterns, because humans are similar across many different nations and cultures. We have similar types of patterns. And heck, maybe you aren't making our mistakes, but you need to know what our mistakes are, so maybe you don't make them, or maybe you can recognize the similarities. That's what I'll say. Nonfictions are just very useful in that way, and especially this one, especially in this time, you should read it. So that's my wrap up for, what month is this? June. I hope, like I said, I would recommend all of these books from this month. I think my least favorite was Time of Contempt, but that is the fourth book in a series, second novel, but fourth installment in the Witcher series. So honestly, I recommend The Last Wish a lot. You should read that. I'm still not sure if you should read the novels. I need to read all 5 of those, but The Last Wish, really good. And if you only read one book that I have talked about this month, I think I would want you to read Redemption in Indigo. And that's because I don't see people talk about it a lot. And I don't think people really know what they're going to expect. And it's a beautiful story. And it's by a really smart woman. Like, this author is amazing. And I love this work. So if you only pick up one thing that I've talked about in this video, this is it. Read Redemption in Indigo by Dr. Karen Lord, and you're welcome. It's going to be a great read, I promise. And with that, if you want me to know you're here, why don't you put down below something in indigo? I don't really care what emoji. Pick a blue or indigo colored emoji. That's fine. It can be a heart. It's probably the easiest one to come up with. And you can comment down below your favorite book. Like, if you could recommend me one book that you've read recently, what would it be? You can also tell me, I guess, a disappointing read. I will gladly hear that. Maybe that'll make me stay away from it. Otherwise, like if you like it, subscribe if you want to, and I will see you in the next one.